So I share my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible enough?
Please speak loudly. We can sort of hear you, but please speak loudly. We'll try.
Yeah,
We're working on the tech side on this side, but I think you can begin, and everybody in the room will ask everybody to be very quiet, and we'll do our best to be able to hear your presentation. So please proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I share my screen. I am very happy to be part of this conference, and I appreciate the work that Girat is doing. So my presentation is Will They Be Seen or Heard? The Cameroon Woman's Blend of Organic and Formal Strategy to Combat Violence Against Women in Conflict and Gain Access to the Conflict Resolution Table. So I begin by presenting the map of Cameroon, which is made up, the administrative map of Cameroon made up of 10 regions. And the two regions which are primarily concerned, they are presented here, the Northwest region and the Southwest region. And I present the context. Cameroon was colonized by Germany from 1884 to 1916. The territory was split between Britain and France in 1916 as the property of the vanquished was shared between the victors of the First World War. France administered a greater part of the territory under the League of Nations mandate system and the UN trusteeship system from 1916 to 1960, when it gained independence as La République du Cameroun. The British administered British Cameroon as part of Nigeria under the League of Nations mandate system and the UN system from UN trustee system from 1916 to 1961. The British Cameroon had independence through a UN-sponsored plebiscite with two options, either to join Nigeria or La République du Cameroun. And they chose to join La République du Cameroun under a federal form of state in 1961. However, the federal constitution protected distinct received colonial identities and traditional cultural values of the two peoples. From 1961 to 1996, the federal state was illicitly set aside for a decentralized unitary state consisting of 10 regions. The Northwest and the Southwest regions are two of the 10 regions that make up the Republic of Cameroon. The problem stems from the fact that for a long period of time, these two regions, the Northwest and Southwest regions, they have always had discontent over the marginalization by the Francophone-dominated government. This discontent had expression in corporate claims in 2016. But unfortunately, the corporate claims were met by heavy-handed military response from the French-dominated government. This resulted to radicalization and rapid escalation to armed conflict. This is manifested through proclamations from top political leaders who are in government, who consider the claims of these two regions and the regions themselves as two cubes of sugar, which are dropped in an ocean. And so those claims could not have any effects. And they had also earlier been referred to by prominent political leaders as l'ennemi dans la maison. Generally, these two peoples, these two regions, made up of the English-speaking people, they consider French as a language of abuse. So each time they are referred to derogatively, they use French. So they've often been referred to as l'ennemi dans la maison, that is an enemy in the house. They've referred to as l'anglophile, and etc. In the midst of all this, we have secessionist claims quickly emerged. And the civilians were caught in the middle of all of this. Atrocity and war crimes became a way of life in these two regions. Arbitrary arrest and transfer of young English speakers out of their regions to Yaoundé was a common phenomenon from 2016 right up to about 2022, even 2023. Targeting and arbitrarily arresting Anglophones who had escaped the conflict to other regions was the order of the day. Forced disappearances became common, summary executions, abductions, and women were caught up in the middle of all this. The government forces accused them as being agents of secessionists, and secessionist forces also accused them of aligning with government forces. So there was so much chaos. Here we see just a peak of the iceberg of the situation that reigned between 2016 up till 2023. The government forces, they carried out reprisal attacks on communities suspected of hosting the secessionist fighters. They burned down homes, whole villages, whole communities, while the secessionist fighters too were also trying to put up their own resistance. So the major issue is that the government organized a peace talk, and women made up just about 50%. Women made up just about 15% of the peace talk. They were not really given a space, despite the fact that they were participating fully in the conflict situation. They were victims, they were participating, trying to build peace and all of that. So that's where we saw women mobilization and very high activity. So the objective of the study is to examine how women blend traditional and modern conflict resolution practices to chart peace channels. Conflict management practices are considered traditional or organic if they have been in existence and practiced over an extended period. If they evolve within the African societies rather than being a product of external importation. Expressed by Zatman. Within the context of this work, modern conflict practices refer to those former written mechanisms believed to be imported. These are the strategies women resorted to. This work, or our arguments, are based on the theory of womanism, which find expression in the works of Antwerp Kevin, Tony Olga, Zomo Nyowe, and others. And womanism speaks of the celebration of womanhood and the recognition of the role of this gender in peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building, which all tie in with the United Nations Security Resolution 1325, which calls on stakeholders to include women in all peace processes. The notion of peace process is quite a very complex, multifaceted notion involving peacekeeping, peace building, and peacemaking, which finds expression in Antwerp and Kelvin Ibok's work as a positive move from a context of hatred, cultural or structural violence, and desire to revenge to a context that is expected to be dominated by love, understanding, sympathy, and genuine concern for the feeling of those that were perceived as enemies. It is a progressive move revolving around the search for creative, acceptable, and sustainable outcome of conflict. It involves a visible flow of ideas and actions from everywhere in society, including women. This explains why the Cameroonian woman, especially the English-speaking woman, decided to leave the unenviable position of victim to espouse and assert themselves within the arena of peacemaking. Traditional women assert themselves in public spaces. Scholarship holds that the pre-colonial Cameroonian woman was never just a passive recipient of socio-political norms. They are known to position themselves in public spaces through mobilization using their femininity, voices, and tools. The very bodies that serve as battlegrounds in armed conflicts are used to chart channels for peace. And that is what these women focused on. So the women started by mobilization and creation of a women's peace movement. This took place through the creation of the Southwest Northwest Women's Task Force, called SNOT. This task force is made up of different women's organizations, right from the grassroots level to high political levels. And then it liaised with the Cameroon Women's Peace Movement called KWPM, which cuts across the national territories, made up of women's organizations, which spans the whole national territory. This mobilization was anchored on their womanhood and motherhood as stakeholders for peace, as parents, wives, sisters, and family members. The mobilization materialized into what we call the public lamentation campaign. Public lamentation campaign is a traditional peace tool used by the Cameroonian woman for a very long time. And it calls upon them to appear in public and whip out, express themselves in sentiments. Here in this photograph, we find women from all walks of life, from lawyers to teachers, to grassroots women, to traders, to business women, to politicians, who came out to decry the war crimes and the crimes against humanity that was the order of the day in these two regions. Women's public lamentation is a non-violent cultural tool that women use to express and make themselves heard. It's often used in grave danger or critical moments in a community. The public lamentation expresses their humanity, their motherhood, which shows violation of motherhood in killing their children, womanhood in killing their husband, familyhood in killing family members, and tears that are full of emotions, sentiments, and all that it takes for them to be women, to be mothers, to be family members. Then one other very highly traditional tool that they also deploy is the takumbang. The takumbang is a social regulatory tool that is embedded in the traditional political institution, which is common in the Northwest and Southwest regions, which is the chieftaincy institution. The chieftaincy institution is what regulated society during pre-colonial times. And with colonization, it has been greatly weakened in other areas, especially like in the Southwest region, but in the Northwest region, it still stands very strong, and people pay a lot of allegiance to it. The takumbang is made up of post-menopausal women. It gained prominence in contemporary Cameroon public space in the early 1990s when Cameroon was going through a difficult democratic process. Adherence by women to this organization seems to be motivated by the maternal instincts in context of systematic human rights violations. The Takumen women assert themselves in public spaces using their bodies as symbolic and metaphoric devices to push their agenda through. Their modus operandi generally involves non-violent and non-verbal appearance, with peace plant leaves in their mouths, a red band on their shaved heads, and they are nude and they move barefooted. Their nudity is accompanied by public defecation and urination around the place where they really want to express themselves. This link here, if we click it, we will see an expression of it, but that is very modern. It does not really portray the real traditional Takumban woman because it's difficult for us to capture them in pictures. They demonstrate in public spaces such as police stations where people were held in custody. They did this a lot when a lot of young English-speaking young men and women were arrested arbitrarily and locked up in police and gendarme stations, and some transported out of their regions of origin. All this mobilization and expression culminated into the Cameroon Women's Peace Convention. It was the first ever women's peace convention in Cameroon, where about 777 plus women's organizations and networks met in Yaoundé from July 27 to 31st, 2021. At the end of negotiations, conversations, deliberations, discussions, sharing of what has been going on in the conflict situation, they came up with a written document which they refer to as a peace treaty. Some of the key aspects of the peace treaty include the women's recognition that conflict is part and parcel of human existence, and they are asserting themselves as daughters of Cameroon. They want to be part of the peace process, and they really want a special place at the peace table. They convene as people with shared humanity and a common destiny. And they resolved that the option of inclusive dialogue is the principal way to make peace in Cameroon. How efficient this blend gets women to the peace table. As an observer and as an existent in context, I think that it's work in process, very, very good work in progress, which is quite remarkable. It has proposed the Cameroonian woman ahead, making her visible, and that visibility cannot be wiped out. And in the occasion where there will be any peace talks, I think they will have a place. It is an important step as they move away from the position of victimhood to that of a victim disentangling herself to be a part of the solution. The treaty text was transmitted to the government through the Minister of Women's Empowerment and the Family. And another major dialogue or peace process is still to be convened. We don't know when. And we are hoping that at that peace dialogue, the women will be able to assert themselves. Thank you so very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Verlaine. People, please hold your questions, write them down so you don't forget them. And we'll come back to you in just a minute, but I would like to try and bring on Donlefack Martin to talk about the Chad Basin now. Hopefully we have the sound working a little bit better. How are we doing with making that technical switch? Just waiting on our tech folks to bring on.
Hello.
There, yes, hello.
Yes, are you getting me now?
Yes, much better. Thank you for waiting.
Okay. But I will not be able to share my him again because I changed my computer.
Okay,
Greeting everybody, to everybody. My communication is entitled Female Victim on Resurfacing Slave Culture in the Context of Terrorist Activities in the Lake Chad Basin. Let me put you in the context of this communication. The Lake Chad Basin includes the territories of Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. It corresponds to the former Adamawa of Fombina of the Sokoto Empire. In the Lake Chad Basin, the jihad combined capture and exploitation operations supported by a trade economy, thus encouraging the extension of trans-Saharan trade routes to the south beyond Kano and making the Lake Chad Basin in a veritable crossroad for the exchange of slaves between North and Central Africa. Even today, the after effects of the expansion of Islam, whether from Borno or Sokoto, are still visible in the Lake Chad Basin, and the incidents that have resurfaced are real signs of the durability of a conquering and slave-owning culture that is an obstacle to the development of human rights and freedoms. The atrocities of the Islamic sect Boko Haram in recent decades have plunged the Lake Chad Basin back into the religious discrimination of the time of the Islamic conquest, with a strong increase in violence against women. The key question of this paper is, what are the historical links between the victimization of women and the terrorist acts currently taking place in the Lake Chad Basin? Is this a case of history repeating itself, or a case of a continuity of practices or habits linked to a social hierarchy dictated by relationships of subordination? Following on from this key question, I propose a number of objectives. From a heuristic point of view, this paper aims to reconcile the divergence approaches observed in the analysis by going beyond the framework of a fixed representation of societies in which individuals and cultures are in opposition. The conclusion to be drawn is that no society has remained unchanged, and that more than a century on, the violence associated with the spread of Islam in the Chadian Basin must no longer flourish with impunity. On a sociological level, it raises the problem of cohabitation between human groups with different beliefs, with a view to destroying stereotypes and promoting a culture of peace and respect for human rights. Ultimately, through the production of history, the aim is to achieve a better understanding of the reality of our daily life, to overcome emotions, apprehensions, misunderstandings, and stigmatization, and to build a more human society. I have organized this communication into four main parts. One, jihad and servitude in the Lake Chad Basin. Two, jihad and the enslavement of women in the Chad Basin. Three, terrorism and the resurrection of a violent and enslaving religious hegemony. And the last part, terrorism and the victimization of women. Let us move to part one, jihad and slavery in the Lake Chad Basin. The pretext for human trafficking in the history of the Lake Chad Basin region is the Islamic proselytism of the great political hegemonies of the Chadian Basin. Indeed, since the introduction of Islam in this region, the territorial conquest and slave raids were anointed with religious motives. In the 16th century, for example, the mayor of Borno, Idris Alaoma, decided to enslave the Sao, but his historiographer saw it only as a demonstration of his faith in the ways of Allah. In the 19th century, who had taken on the mission of spreading Islam, spread the blood of unbelievers more than the faith itself. The term unbeliever meaning more someone who could be reduced to slavery than someone who resisted to the call to convert. For example, the attitude of Adama's soldiers after the victories is described as a sense of robbery and barbarism. When the conquered village were not destroyed and pillaged, they strategically constituted a sort of slave reserve to fit the commercial secure of the new masters. The reality of slavery in the Lake Chad Basin in the 19th century is also justified by these figures derived from the collection of slaves attributed in the Basal Lamida of Yola. Sewu Amadu's work speaks of nearly 178,000 slaves collected in the Lamidas of Concha, Banyo, Tinye, and Gaundere alone between 1823 and 1902. Part two, jihad and the enslavement of women in the Chadian Basin. Whether in the Borno or Sokoto era, the raids were also an opportunity to renew the arrests of the leading figures and authorities in the Lamida and Muslim communities supplied by the Trans-Saharan trade routes. Women were much in demand by the traders from Tripoli and Fesa, who visited the local market. To escape from the slavers, the victims sometimes developed releases as the cost of sacrifices, as in the case of the Muslim women. Oral tradition admits the objectification of women as a means of making themselves ugly and unmarriageable. Before becoming a cultural practice, the labor worn by Muslim women were originally intended to avoid slavery by serving as a means of reproduction. According to the oral tradition, the traders of Tripoli and Fesan would never buy them because they will not be able to resell them. They say that they were very disfigured by the silver nail they were wearing on their lower lip. Moreover, two of their lower teeth were removed to make way for the metal which penetrated their mouths. And after a year or two, the weight of the metal caused the lip to fall completely to the chin so that their face were repulsive. The part three, terrorism and the resurrection of violence, enslaving religious hegemony. The jihad group Boko Haram has been active in the Chadian Basin for several decades. It seems that the group's violence is not inspired by contemporary Islamic terrorism, but by a moderate regional history. The characters, operating methods, and victims of Boko Haram, in fact, present similarities with political and religious facts that prevail in the same region, particularly in the 19th century and in the name of a Fulani hegemony. A violent and slave-owning leadership that has not changed. Abubakar Sheko echoes from the past. The leader of Boko Haram, Abubakar Sheko, bears a striking similarity to another leader, the Fulani Aman Aji Wure in the same region from the end of the 19th century. The extreme violence, the cruelty, the division of the world into believers and non-believers, and the inspiration drawn from Islam are easily recognizable in both men. For both men, the situation of war and slavery are intimately linked. The rapprochement between the two leaders is widely recognized in the region as oral accounts testify. This is the testimony of Matakwam from the village of Usta in the northern Cameroon. And I quote, Sheko is no different from Amanaji. Both love women, both kill mercilessly, both drink water from men's skulls, both come from Madagali, both tyrants operate in the same way and have the same goal. The second testimony comes from Manawuda from the village of Zelevet in the northern Cameroon. He said, I quote, for me, Sheko is the same as the Madagali chief who used to send his troops to capture young girls. When the whites arrested him, he told them, "If you kill me, I will rise again one day and I will do more evil than I'm doing now." The whites did not believe him, and today it is him who is incarnated in Abubakar Sheku. But for terrorism and female victimization, the Mandara Highlanders' comments on Boko Haram are not expressed in terms of terrorism, but rather in terms of the return of slavery. Moreover, the kidnapping of the girls and young women of Chibok is strangely situated in the same rhetoric of the return of the slave hunters. Amanaji's predilection for capturing young women is clearly evident in his journal, from which the following extract is taken just for the year 1913. I quote, 21st May 1913, I captured 20 girl slaves. 11 June 1913, I captured 6 girl slaves and 10 cattle and killed 3 men. 25th June 1913, I captured 48 girl slaves and 26 cattle and killed 5 people. 6th July 1913, I captured 30 cattle and 6 girl slaves. According to Amnesty International, between 2014 and 2015, at least 2,000 women and girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram. Young kidnapped girls were reduced to sexual slaves. The Chibok attack and Sheko's speech on the subject show how access to women was able to attract Boko Haram young unmarried men who did not have the means to marry. In particular, it enabled them to become Babasari, which in Fulani means head of the family, which is impossible without marriage. When these girls were held captive, they were regularly raped by fighters. Many young girls have been used as fighters and kamikazes in attacks. This testimony of Aisha, adopted in 2014 by Boko Haram, is very revealing. I quote, I was one of those trained in shooting. I was also trained to use bomb and attack a village. I took part in an operation in my own village. Boko Haram and extrajudicial executions of insubordinate women. Women who refused to obey Boko Haram fighters were simply executed. By the way, this is Fatima's testimony after escaping from the Boko Haram camp, and I quote, some refused to be converted or to learn how to kill. They were all killed and buried in a common grave in the bush. As a conclusion, the inspiration of the Boko Haram Islamic State is found in the historic empire of Borno and especially in the Sokoto Caliphate, which is considered to be the golden age of the jihadist movement. Boko Haram terrorism has therefore certainly benefited from the insecurity that has existed in the Lake Chad Basin since at least the 19th century. Let us now return to our initial question, which is whether these similarities mean that history is repeating itself. We will simply say that the violence associated with Boko Haram is certainly not a replication of history. It is its continuity, because violence, and especially sexual violence, has never stopped being a reality in the Lake Chad Basin. In this case, history does not need to repeat itself because it has never disappeared. It is therefore becoming urgent to take account on the historical context of the Lake Chad Basin in order to think effectively about how to fight a form of violence that has never disappeared in this region. As recommendations, and because historical facts that reappear in an uncontrolled manner in the present and that contribute to serve the interests of a minority obsessed by its glorious past or to develop ideas of revenge among people formerly oppressed, constitute real human or identity bombs, we recommend to African governments, 1, serious consideration on the question of identity in the definition and orientation of the notion of citizenship. Identity must stop being exploited for political purpose, more especially in the logic of divide and rule. Governments must therefore direct their effort toward the fight against apprehension, stigmatizations, misunderstanding, and prejudices linked to the history of the people they are governing, and which today are reflected in the violation of numerous human rights and the fragility of the notion of nation in the true sense of the term. Thank you for your kind attention. Hello?
In both cases, we're seeing the legacy of colonialism and the historical kind of divide and rule practices that were a core part of colonialism are continuing into the present day and continuing to cause the kind of genocidal tendencies and violence that the two speakers have spoken about. We might want to interrogate that a little bit more, but before I say anything else, is there anybody in the room who would like to ask a question of either of our speakers? Anybody? You know, we're in that after lunch full belly moment, but hopefully people were able to follow along. And I'm wondering if we're seeing any questions coming in from online. We're not, okay. Is there anybody drawing on any other case study where this link between the colonial divide and rule practices are informing what's currently happening, particularly vis-a-vis women and violence in women and genocide? Anybody want to speak to that at all? Then let me ask the two presenters. Hopefully they were able to hear each other's presentation. And did either of you hear something in your colleague's presentation that you found resonating with your own work? Would either of you like to try and address that?
I did not get you, please. I don't know if it is possible for you to repeat. I did not get you.
Would you repeat that, please?
Hello?
Oh, so you want me to repeat the question?
Yes,
So
please.
the question
Yes.
was, what I noticed in your two presentations was the importance of the colonial legacy of kind of divide and conquer, divide and rule tactics have left such a deep legacy that is perpetrating the violence now and even in its gendered form. And both of you spoke to that, but with slightly different dynamics. So I'm wondering if listening to your colleague's presentation, it brought up any new idea or thoughts, or it resonated in some way with you.
Okay.
It's sorry. Like,
Please go ahead.
yes, it resonates. What Nchang presented resonates very much with me, because as an existent in context, I am from the English-speaking part of Cameroon, and when I look at Cameroon's problems today, I see that even scholarship expresses that. I see that much of the problem is rooted to the divide and rule policy that France and partially Britain instituted. For instance, if we look at the independence, the fathers of those who could have been called the fathers of independence in Cameroon. They were all killed. And when it was time for independence, independence was not legated to those who the people would have seen as their representatives, as independent per se from the colonial, those whom the colonial masters could still remote control. And they had been cultured with this philosophy and practice of divide and rule, creating the other, distanciation, exclusionism, which is very, very much rife in today's Cameroon. Otherwise, the Anglophone problem could have been simply a governance problem. But because of the roots of colonialism, the society is seriously fractured, is divided along very, can I say, tribal and colonial cultural lines, which has basically created different peoples in Cameroon who are fighting against each other through a very corrupt system, which is still very much remote controlled by the colonial master, France. That is my perception.
Thank you.
I would like to add something. Yes. What is we are living today in Cameroon is more than the causes is not only from the colonial system. And what I would like to say is that there is no problem between Cameroonians. I mean, Anglophone and Francophone. There is no problem. Our real problem is government, who is now using our differences to oppose ourselves. Because it's not only the problem of Anglophone and Francophone. In Cameroon, if you are from different ethnic groups, what is we will just face that there is a possibility for you to be opposed by government. The government will use your ethnic group to oppose you. It's the same thing concerning religions. At times you will see conflict between Muslim and Christian. They don't. What I'm trying to say is that their daily life is not concerned by that conflict. It's just what I just said during my presentation, that is the policy of divide to rule. So what we are living is just that government are using our differences to separate us. Is what I wanted to ask to add to what Vera just said as a response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to add anything to those comments? Anything coming in from online? No?
Sorry, can I still say something, please?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and with regards to the Cameroonian woman, right from pre-colonial time had always had her space and her place in the society, and they exerted a lot of influence, because the Cameroonian woman had a place in the traditional political institution, which is the chieftaincy institution. And they had their specific offices, one of which is referred to as the Manfo. The Manfo in Cameroon is a very, very respected title, and they wield a lot of power in that tradition, in that traditional political institution. But thanks to colonialism, that political institution was so weakened, and thanks to colonialism, the woman was more or less that position of that woman, because the institution was weakened, that position of the woman too was weakened. And we find that in today's Western form of state and Western form of government that is in Cameroon, the woman now is struggling to reassert herself to a position where she was before colonization. And that is why we see that in peace talks, like the major national dialogue that the head of state decided to organize, a negligible percentage or space was given to the woman after the woman had lived all through the violence, and she is struggling to throw off the shackles of violence, of victimhood, and be part of the solution, and yet she was not given. So we really have a lot of problems in Cameroon and in Africa at large, which trace their roots right back to colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to respond? I see, did you? Yes, Janine would like to respond to that. I think there's some.
Tore, if I can use the metaphor of a fabric, they tore, oh, I see. Oh, okay. So I'm supposed to be here. All right. Yeah, so the colonialism tore the fabric that really united many African societies. And the tearing of that fabric came in different elements. And one of them is what Vera is referring to, which is the role of the woman. And many people just see it because when colonizers came, they came with their own views of what the role of the woman. And that really destroyed what the role of the woman was in those societies. We're not saying it was perfect, but there are many societies where the woman had a major role, had these terms that show the woman is an instrumental contributor to the strengthening of the society. And so, again, you know, think about Ubuntu. Earlier on, Jermaine talked about Ubuntu. It was just like torn apart. And people who used to help each other, to support each other, now picked up machetes to kill each other. There's so much that's been destroyed. And so the tendency is for us to study the result rather than connecting dots. Because if we connect dots, then perhaps we can find a solution much in a more efficient way. I'd like to add then maybe a comment for you, Vera. And oh my God, I'm so sorry, I forgot your name. This is embarrassing. Our first speaker, second speaker. Donlefack, yes, I'm so sorry. So if you can kind of address how in the world do we find a solution, right? It's on us. Now you know, we can bring the colonialism and we have the right to, but how do we fix it? You know, let's think about it. And I think you both touched on the fact that if we're going to talk about peace today, we have to involve women. But I was thinking more about education. So anyway, but I'll let you share. Mm-hmm.
Would somebody like to go, would one of you like to go first to respond to Janine's question?
Did you hear my question?
No.
Sorry,
Were you,
I
were you-
didn't get your question, Janine.
Okay,
So
so,
maybe come up here, Janine.
oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll come to this microphone. We're not quite sure how the room is wired. So maybe
Yeah.
take that one. Can you speak?
You sure that one, because earlier it wasn't, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we talked about the fact that at least you, you know, as you shared, both of you shared the fact that in Africa, to talk about peace, we cannot talk about peace without involving women. You both of you really pointed out one way or another. But what else can be done? Now that we know the diagnosis is there, now what can be done? What are the solutions, right? Yeah, bringing women to the table. But then I thought, I mentioned that my mind is more into education, and I don't know where you see it, like the youth, right? Raising those who maybe can support us, can understand, so we can educate about that past, that horrible past, and the present, and how the approach that we've been using, at least the leaders that we have been using the same tools that colonizers used to divide us and that are continuing. So anyway, but I'll let you share what you think would be the solution, really like a lasting solution to our problems of women exploitation.
Thank you so very much, Janine. Yes, I agree 100%. Education is one path. But as the women of Cameroon have demonstrated, we need to look back into our inner selves. We need to look back at the tools that existed within the African society, which were utilized in making peace. Because it is not like African society never used to have their own challenges. They used to have conflicts, but they have organic tools that they used to resolve their conflicts, and they live together as one people. But with colonization, most of those tools were discarded or ignored. And those tools, they are imbued in our way of life, just like you have talked about the Ubuntu. They are imbued in our way of life, and they include like practical tools, natural things that God has given. If we look at the photograph of the women, of the public mourning of women, we see them, the whole people are utilized. We have the kola nut, which is very symbolic. For us, we have we have all those traditional practices that we use, that were utilized in making peace. So in addition to the education, which can be a key tool to adopt to build peace in Africa, include women in the peace processes, I think it's high time that we look at our tools and incorporate them into the educational system using African approaches of knowledge building and transmission to be able to maybe change the conversation or modify the conversation and own it so that it should fit into our way of life for us to be able to move forward towards a peaceful African society. That is my thought. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Donlefack, do you want to share your thoughts about that?
Yes, yes. Also, I would read that we should base our fight on education. But what I would like to say is that here in Africa, even when a woman is educated, at times the one who used to bring violence are men. So we have to educate women, but we have also to insist on men for them to respect women. Is what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Janine, and thank you again to both of our speakers for a very interesting session. We're now going to have a break until the half hour. So we will resume with our next panel at 3:30, which is called After the Genocide in Rwanda. So we invite people to, I think we still have some hot coffee over there. So those of you in the room, we invite you to grab more food, have some coffee. And for those of you online, please make yourself a cup of coffee or tea and join us back at the half hour. So in about 20 minutes or so. Yeah, thank you.